Good morning, my name is Tyler Gill, and today I'll be presenting my research on apocalypse movies and the real world. To begin with, I'd like to give you some background. Currently, we're not in a great economic state considering the U.S. We don't have a whole lot of money going out, and we don't have a whole lot of money going in, and a whole lot of money going out. However, there is a bit of hope. Our current primary export is actually entertainment, and one of the most popular mediums of entertainment is movies. So I was thinking, how can we make more money for movies? And I figured, why not focus on one of my favorite genres of all time, apocalypse movies, just to make sure I don't have to hit every movie of all time. Here's some literature I took to kind of give basis to my content analysis. The first one, Effective Characterization of Movie Scenes Based on Content Analysis and Physiological Changes, gave me the kind of basis I required to approach my content analysis. It gave me an idea of how to set it up, how to execute it in a way that is effective. The second one, Fat Stigmatization in Television Shows and Movies, a Content Analysis, kind of provided a model of how it should look, how my data should look, and what should it look like when it comes out the other end. Now, on to my actual research. How have the publication rates of apocalyptic movies been affected by world events from the years 1950 to 2021? A couple definitions just to make sure everybody's up to speed. When I talk about subgenre, I'm talking about a separate classification between movies based on the cause of the apocalypse depicted. Typically, it can vary between many different things, but I narrowed it down into just a couple different sections. Nuclear being the event of nuclear war, aliens, alien invasion. Eco, short for ecological, which is just an ecological disaster, maybe earthquakes, ice age, something like that. War is pretty generic. Instead of just standard nuclear war, it's something else entirely. Disease is anything relating to pathogens. Typically, this is made up of your classic zombie movies, but it can include a bit of everything. AI refers to artificial intelligence taking over the world. Rapture specifically references kind of a religious end of the world, maybe such as the rapture depicted in the book of Revelations. There have been multiple movie renditions of that. And finally, other. Simply movies that couldn't be characterized into any of the previous sets and just simply either didn't specify or just didn't fit into any one of them. When I talk about a world event is an event that has a significant impact on two or more continents. This helps to make sure that I get a good solid set and have a nice definition so that it makes it nice and clear for everybody. For my method, I chose on the movie side to generate a list of movies from a website called IMDb Pro, which is world-renowned for having excessive data on pretty much any movie, TV show, game, book, anything you could look for. From there, I narrowed it down to the specified apocalyptic genre and to the necessary decade period that I was going to be investigating. I had split up my data into periods of 10 years, starting with 1950 to 1959, 1960 to 1969, and etc. Third, I would run down the list of the movies it spit out and record the data as it was available. I recorded name, the subgenre, and the publication date for each one of these movies. On the event side, I gathered an events list from a USA Today article and then cross-referenced it with my previous criteria to make sure that the data was quality. I then related those events to trends found in the movie side of the data. Now let's get on to what we're actually looking for, the findings. I know, it looks really simple. It's going to get more complicated from here. This is the 1950 to 1959 section with only one relevant event actually occurring, the first hydrogen bomb test on November 1st, 1952. Obviously, we can see there's quite a bit of a disparity in between the two subgenres, with the nuclear section taking up 75% of all movies versus the 25% in the alien section. Now we're getting a bit more complicated. In the 1960 to 1969, The relevant events were the Cuban Missile Crisis, occurring from October 16th to 28th in 1962, and the landing on the moon in July 20th, 1969. Of course, that's continued the rise of nuclear apocalyptic movies, giving over 65% of all movies published, including a separate section with a significant presence of aliens. However, this included the first appearance of disease-related movies, ecological movies, and our first appearance of other. This trend continues with having a large section followed by several smaller ones in 1970 to 1979. The related events here were the Pentagon Papers release in February 8, 1971, during which the government released a set of papers detailing our effects in the Vietnam War. Again, Saigon falls on April 30th, 1975, a further development in the Vietnam War, and an extension, the Cold War, continuing to fuel our nuclear obsession. Finally, the rise of the PC in January of 1977, the first time a personalized computer is actually created and effective. We're starting to actually amp up our computing power now, which of course leads to the creation of our AI section over here. Of course, nuclear still dominates, but not quite as much as it used to, with aliens taking up less of a slice of the pie nowadays, though ecological is rising, though I couldn't find quite an explanation for that one. In 1980 to 1989, we had the first impact of AIDS in America, one of our first ever modern pandemics, on June 5th, 1981. Of course, everybody remembers this. It was quite the event. Many people died. It was quite tragic. Secondly, the internet is born, though not as we know it as today. It was just a set of systems collected together between several military installations all over the U.S. That occurred on January 1st, 1983. Following that, on the very end, the Berlin Wall falls, November 9th, 1989, showing a decline in the Cold War. Now, our nuclear slice still takes up a pretty big piece of the pie, but not as much as it used to. We're also seeing a big increase in our war slice of the pie, definitely because of or at least I think, because of the decline of the Cold War. However, we still have bits and pieces here and there of our disease slice, ecological, AI, rapture, and finally our other slice. From 1990 to 1999, we have quite a big shift. The Cold War ends on February 1st, 1992, with the dawn of cloning not coming just about 5 years after, on July 5th, 1996. Following that, we have our first display of artificial intelligence at work, with an AI beating the world chess champ at the time on May 11th, 1997. It was the first time that artificial intelligence had ever outsmarted a human. Of course, during this time, we had a very large spike, though I could not find a particular reason why, in the ecological slice of the pie. However, nuclear continues its fall, reaching only 8.3% of total movies. Rapture takes a bit of a jump here, most likely because of the turn of the century coming in the next 10 years. There was a large obsession during that time with the turn into 2000 being the end of the world and that God would come down once again. So of course, Rapture made quite a jump. Additionally, AI made quite a jump with the introduction of AI beating humanity for the first ever time, and people thought maybe it would happen again. Finally, breaching into the 2000s, we have the 2000 to 2009 section, the relevant events being that 9/11 occurs on September 11th, 2001, followed by the release of An Inconvenient Truth by Al Gore, bringing to light a lot of the ecological issues that are currently plaguing the world, on May 24th, 2006. This brought ecological into the mainstream media for the most part, though surprisingly ecological decided to take a dip out of the slice. Finally, the iPhone is introduced in January 9th, 2007, further improving our computing power. As you can see here, there's a bit inconclusive. Everybody has about an equal slice of the pie with some exceptions, so there's no quite dominant one at the moment. However, that changes quickly from 2010 to 2019. In the very beginning of 2010, a catastrophic oil spill occurs on April 20th, 2010, leading to a massive ecological disaster. Following that, NASA flies by Pluto on July 14th, 2015, making it so we first actually leave our solar system. And finally, a triple set of hurricanes hits the southeast in August to September 2017, further highlighting our ecological problems. Again, during this time, we saw a general rise in disease while nuclear continues to fall behind. We also saw a significant spike in the other category, though ecological and aliens tend to dominate along with disease and other. Finally, we reached 2020 to 2021, the most notable event being the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm sure everybody's here experienced a bit of that one. Of course, that saw the continued rise of the disease section, along with a specific rise, curiously, in AI, though several of the subgenres had a bit of a falling out. Simply, none were published. Now it's time to draw some conclusions from that big mess of data. For the most part, it's pretty inconclusive, especially during the 2000 to 2009 era, and some of it tends to contradict itself. However, we can notice some distinguishable trends, especially during the Cold War era and our obsession with nuclear fever. However, we do have a bit of limitations. The first being that the data is somewhat unreliable the farther we get back into the past. But during 1950 to 1959, movies weren't exactly a huge medium, much less apocalyptic movies, and thus there were less documentation. So it's more difficult to get reliable data from that era. Second is sample size. In 1950 to 1959, only 8 apocalyptic movies were ever published, in high contrast with the 2010 to 2019 era, which had a little over 50 movies published. However, there are plenty of future directions for this to go in. This could be used as a basis for similar research in completely other sets of data, maybe in a different genre. I only covered apocalyptic movies and I only covered apocalyptic movies. You could also cover science fiction, horror, dramas if you really want to, or you could just cover movies entirely, TV shows, books, games. There's so many other options. It's also worth investigating deeper into the relationship of exactly when those spikes occurred. And finally, I would probably include the number of views gotten from streaming services, especially in the later years. That data tends to be pretty reliable and relatively easy to get, which could help to prove some trends. Here are some of my works cited, and I'd like to move on to questions.
Tyler, thank you so much. All right, oral defense panel, question number 1. Tyler, how did your review of the methods used by scholars in the field inform your selection of a research method or process that is aligned with your research question?
I found that with a lot of the content analysis papers, they split up all their movies and whatever they were investigating based on very certain criteria, typically into the quote-unquote subgenres, though they often called them different things in other papers. I simply took the idea and ran with it and decided to create a set of my own, my own restrictions, if you would, to basically create my own set of data. Kind of filter it out, make sure that I could get something that was concrete, numbers-based, and not just, I think this, or I want to think this.
How did the limitations of your method or data influence your new understanding?
It definitely made me realize how little there is on the internet. When I was looking through all of this mountain of data, I realized that there's little documentation of so many different things on the internet, whereas some things have just extensive documentation, which I found to be somewhat of an injustice considering the fact that the internet is supposed to be our biggest repository of knowledge.
Tyler, how did you handle the uncertainty of the research process?
For the most part, I just took it and I ran with it. I just kind of had to keep going and keep thinking on my feet. A lot of times there was, maybe there was a subsection or a subgenre that didn't work or that collided with another one. So I had to constantly be changing up that data, reanalyzing and relogging until I finally got to the set that I discussed before. It was definitely a long process of trial and error.
Tyler, thank you so much. All right, guys, a question. Floor is open for questions.
Yeah, Chance.
So were you just tying it in, like the movies released in that decade were also tied with, in your assumption was that they were tied with the events in that decade?
Yes.
Because kind of what I feel like my hypothesis would be that it takes maybe 20 years for them to make a movie about an event that happened like 20 years ago.
You'd be surprised with how fast they can pump out movies these days. If you look at kind of the average time it takes from a movie to start production to end production, it only takes maybe 2-3 years if they push it along really fast. In a lot of these cases, there were a lot of money grabs, so they would be pushing them out 2 to 3 years.
I also wish you would have included the event in 2012 when the Mayan calendar ended or whatever. Because personally, my family went outside that day and counted up the world. And like I remember my dad being like, "Hey, let's go outside and see if like the world's ending." And it didn't. But I wish you would have included that event because I genuinely think a lot of people were under the assumption that the world might end like 2012 December or something.
I was considering it, and then I found it could have gone so many different ways, though I did find a very interesting one. The movie 2012 about the disaster, the Mayan calendar end, actually came in that 2000-2009 period. It was one of those ecological movies.
So they released it
Before, which kind of threw me for a loop a little bit. I thought they would release it after, but no, they decided to release it before, and then decided to make it a re-release in 2012 because of all the hype concerning it. Yes.
I remember that you were talking about a while ago with like the grossing of movies, and so why did you decide to omit that from your presentation?
Because I found that a lot of that data was highly unreliable. That was part of my limitations. I couldn't really get solid numbers with those because many different sites were reporting many different numbers, and those numbers would then have to be cross-referenced with inflation and then maybe different currencies. Maybe I'm dealing with a Chinese yuan instead of a US dollar. And a lot of times it just came out to be way too uncertain for me to actually get a solid set of data.
Mine are more observations than questions. I think coming at it from a sci-fi perspective, but using the same categories would be amazing too, because I think a lot of those categories are very sci-fi, not just apocalyptic. And also, my theory about why ecological disaster movies got big at that, beginning of the 90s, I would say, was because there was a lot of talk then about the hole in the ozone layer. I know y'all weren't around then, but that was like a huge deal. Everybody was like, we gotta fix the hole in the ozone. It was a big deal.
Yeah, just setting up that. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
In 2000, 2009, was that swine flu or bird flu? Bird. Around that time, there was a big increase in disease. So I'm wondering if maybe the mainstream media had an effect instead of just intercontinental issues. But the U.S. is like, bird flu, we're all going to die. Kill the pigeons.
That's one of those things where I was like, I wish I could include it, but I can't because then it goes against all the other things, and then it would invalidate my entire set of data. So I sadly couldn't include it, but it was definitely on my mind with the bird flu and SARS and all those things, which personally I think led to the rise of disease, but I can't say that because I don't have a specific set of data for it.
Well, and I was gonna say, like, some of the things they're saying, it might be more focused in the US and where the movie's being made might have had an influence on some of what you were seeing. I know, like, in the 70s, you were starting to see the rise of environmentalism and the rise of just that ecological awareness of society in general, which might be why you saw that spike starting there of the environmental-based ones happening. And it just reflecting society, but not necessarily reflecting like a big global kind of thing at that point.
In addition to what Ms. Crafton said, is there any like data on where they were published? Because I think I mentioned to you before, but it was like part of why Godzilla was produced in Japan because they weren't supposed to talk about the nuclear thing, you know? So they just slapped giant lizard in there because that's how they like vented their like trauma about the whole nuclear bomb thing.
It was the politically correct way to go about it. But yeah, I did find data concerning that, but I didn't log it, considering the fact that I already had just a massive mountain of data already, and I don't think I would have had time to really draw all those lines. I mean, theoretically, but that would have been a lot of sleepless nights with way too many Dr. Pepper cans that I should probably drink.
Well, I think it would be interesting what Maggie's saying to look at like where these things were produced in addition to all of that. But like you said, it's just getting bigger and bigger when you do that. So, but a future direction.
Oh yeah, there's tons of future directions to go with this. It's just very small, very isolated, but you could basically take it and then run with it wherever you want. There's so many places to go.
I'm actually surprised that war wasn't a bigger slice of the pie, only because we had a couple of decades of the Gulf War and just a lot of things going on at that time. That was a little surprising. And then I noticed that the other slice of the pie got considerably larger towards the end. And what were some of the things in that category did you find in that category?
A lot of times it was just completely unspecified. It was something happened. It never spoke about what happened. It never said exactly. It was an alien. It was asteroids. It was an epidemic. It was just world's gone. No reason. Here you are. So there wasn't really much I could do with it to place it in another category because there wasn't really anything to go off of. There were a couple of ones that were pretty unique, which, if I remember correctly, it's called Cloud Atlas. It followed a man who invents a time machine and then just continuously leaps forward and forward and forward. And the reason why it's considered apocalyptic is because in several instances, a big apocalyptic event happens, of which I think in that movie there were 5, if I remember correctly. So I couldn't really place it in either one of those categories because you could argue, there was an ecological event here, but there was also a nuclear war here, AI takes over here, so you couldn't really put it in any category.
And I was just like wondering, did your thing, it was like specifically 100% apocalypse movies, or is it like, there's some movies I've seen where they have like the AI takeover and it's kind of like a horror movie, but I guess it could be like a dystopian. Is that considered, or is it just straight up apocalypse?
It's for the most part straight up apocalypse, just AI takes over and eradicates humanity. They don't keep them around. They think they're a waste of space, waste of time, and just go about killing every single one of them. Think Terminator. Basically just, you send your T-800s out and clean up the garbage. Any other questions?
Yes, other questions? All right, Tyler, thank you so much.
Ooh, drop something. Oy.